I need to picture a scenario. It's April 2011. You're a student, maybe a researcher, and you need a book.
Okay.
And it's not some kind of rare manuscript from the 16th century. It's a standard, used academic textbook. It's called The Making of a Fly.
Right, about insect genetics.
Yeah.
It's pretty dry stuff, from what I remember.
Very dry. It's a standard biology text. You know, the kind of thing you'd expect to see on a dusty shelf in a university bookstore.
Or, more likely, on Amazon for maybe 30, 40 bucks, tops.
Exactly. So you do what we all do. You log on to Amazon, you search for the book, and you see 2 sellers listing it. And the price for the first copy is, well, it's $1.7 million.
$1.7 million for a used book about flies.
For a used book about flies. But wait,
Yeah.
You're a savvy shopper, right? So you check the second seller.
Of course.
And their copy is listed for $2.1 million.
Which, I mean, by comparison, that makes the first one a steal.
It's a bargain. But this is where the story gets really, really weird. There was a biologist, a guy named Michael Eisen, who was actually watching this happen in real time.
He didn't buy it, I hope.
No, obviously not. But he was fascinated, so he kept refreshing the page day after day. And the prices weren't static, they were moving.
They were escalating.
Oh, rapidly. Every single day, the price of this one book just climbed higher and higher. It went from $2 million to $5 million to $10 million.
Oh, this is insane.
By April 18th, the price for this single, used paperback, peaked at $23,698,655.
And 93 cents.
And 93 cents, plus $3.99 for shipping.
Well, you can't just give the shipping away. I mean, not on a $23 million item.
Yeah.
You have to cover your overhead.
Exactly. Now, obviously, nobody bought the $24 million fly book. Eisen eventually figured out what was going on. The Amazon team stepped in. But this story, as absurd as it is the perfect way to get into what we're talking about today. Because this wasn't a prank.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a human typing in the wrong number of zeros. It was a war.
A very quiet, very, very expensive war between 2 algorithms. And it's a textbook example, pun intended, I guess, of a feedback loop.
Right.
You had seller A, who didn't want to manage their prices by hand, so they had a bot. And the bot's rule was super simple.
Right.
Just look at the competitor's price and price our book at, say, 0.99 times their price.
But at least be slightly cheaper. Standard undercutting strategy. That makes sense.
Right. But seller B got a completely different strategy. Seller B didn't actually have the book.
They were a drop shipper.
They were a drop shipper. If you ordered from them, their plan was to turn around, buy it from seller A, and then ship it to you. So their bot was programmed to look at seller A's price and set their own price at one point to 7 times that amount. They needed that markup to make a profit.
Oh, I see where this is going.
You see it, right? Seller A's bot sees the higher price from seller B, so it raises its own price to be just underneath it.
And then seller B's bot sees that new higher price and raises its price to keep its margin.
And they just walked each other up the ladder, spiraling into infinity, basically, until a human being finally looked at the screen and said, wait a minute.
It's a funny story because the stakes were so low. I mean, it was just a book. But the reason we're diving into Christopher Steiner's book, Automate This, How Algorithms Came to Rule Our World, is because that exact same logic. It's not just pricing textbooks anymore.
Not even close.
This loop of autonomous high-speed decision-making is, right now, running our stock markets. It's diagnosing our illnesses. It's composing the music you listen to. And it might even be deciding who you date.
And usually the stakes are a hell of a lot higher than a biology text. When these things crash in the real world, you don't just get a funny screenshot for Twitter. You get global panic.
Which brings us to the horror movie version of the Amazon story, the flash crash.
May 6, 2010, a day that that lives in infamy on Wall Street.
I went back and watched the old TV coverage of this. It's surreal. Can you set the scene for us?
Yeah. It was already a pretty nervous day on the markets. There were riots in Athens over government austerity measures. The euro was looking really shaky. The markets were down maybe 2 or 3%.
So a bad day, but a normal bad day.
A normal bad day. And then at 2:42 p.m. Eastern time, the floor didn't just fall out, it completely vanished.
It was instantaneous.
I mean, in a matter of minutes, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 998.5 points. At the time, that was the largest single-day point drop in history. Nearly $1 trillion of market value wealth, retirement funds, people's savings, it just evaporated.
If you watch the CNBC broadcast from that afternoon, you see people like Jim Cramer and Aaron Burnett. These are seasoned financial veterans, right? They've seen everything.
Everything.
And they just stopped talking. Mid-sentence, they're just staring at the screens with their mouths open.
Because the numbers just stop making any sense.
Yeah.
We're not talking about a recession where things go down 10% over a month. We're talking about pure hallucinations.
Right.
Accenture, the massive global consulting firm, its stock was trading for a penny, 1 cent.
You could have bought the entire company for the price of a gumball.
And on the other side of the spectrum, you had Apple stock, which is usually pretty stable, momentarily trading at $100,000 a share.
$100,000.
Exactly. And then just as quickly as it all happened, it snapped back. By 3:07 p.m., so what, 15 minutes later, the market had recovered most of the losses. But the psychological damage was done.
The terrifying part wasn't really the loss of the money because most of it came back.
Right.
The terrifying part was that nobody knew why it happened.
Nobody had a clue. The first rumor, you might remember, was a fat finger trade.
Yeah, that some trader in London meant to type million and accidentally typed billion.
And that's what everyone wanted to believe. Human error is comforting. We understand human error.
Right.
But it wasn't a human, it was algorithms. Specifically, high-frequency trading bots.
HFTs?
HFTs. A large sell order came in, about $4.1 billion in futures. Now, in the old days, human traders would absorb that slowly. They would negotiate the price down, spread it out. But the bots just saw the volume, panicked, and started selling to each other.
They created a liquidity crisis where there was no liquidity. It was just bots passing a hot potato back and forth.
And they were doing it in milliseconds. A human's reaction time is what, about 200 milliseconds?
Something like that.
These trades were happening in microseconds. By the time a human trader saw Accenture dropping and thought to themselves, hey, I should buy that, the bot had already sold it, bought it back, and moved on to 1,000 other trades.
So the mission for this deep dive, then, is to unpack this black box. We need to understand what these algorithms actually are, where they came from, and how they migrated from Wall Street into, well, every other part of our lives.
Right.
Because Spiner's argument is that we are crossing a threshold. We're moving from a world where humans use tools to a world where the tools make the decisions for us.
And it's not some kind of science fiction in the future thing. It's history. It's already happened.
So let's start with the absolute basics. When we say the word algorithm in the context of this book, what are we actually talking about? Because I feel like that word gets thrown around constantly in tech circles.
Oh, it does. And at its absolute simplest, an algorithm is just a set of instructions to get to a specific output. A recipe for chocolate cake is an algorithm.
Right.
Input, eggs, flour, sugar, process, mix it all up, bake at 350 degrees, output.cake.
Okay, I can handle cake. The cake algorithm is not scary.
No, but the algorithms we're talking about, the ones running Wall Street or your social media feed, they're just much, much more complex. Think of them like massive decision trees, a tree with millions and millions of branches.
And at every fork in a branch, there's a binary choice.
A binary choice, yes or no, 1 or 0. This goes all the way back to Leibniz's binary system.
Okay.
So the algorithm takes in these huge amounts of data market prices, your click history, weather patterns, whatever, and it runs that data through these millions of forks at lightning speed to arrive at a decision. Buy, sell, show this ad.
And the scary part, or the amazing part, depending on how you look at it, is machine learning.
That's the key. The bots can rewrite their own branches. If a decision leads to a bad outcome, like losing money, the bot prunes that branch and grows a new one. They learn, they evolve, they get smarter.
So let's go to the source. Let's talk about patient zero of this whole algorithmic takeover, Wall Street.
And you probably expect the father of digital trading to be, I don't know, a Goldman Sachs partner or maybe a Wharton professor, someone with a fancy pedigree.
But he wasn't.
No, not at all. He was a Hungarian immigrant named Thomas Peterffy. And his backstory is just, it's cinematic. He was literally born in a hospital basement in Budapest during a Soviet air raid in World War II.
Talk about a high-stress start to life.
Yeah. He grew up under Soviet communism. He learned how to hustle from a young age, smuggling stamps, selling chewing gum on the black market. When he finally got to America, he didn't speak English very well, and he knew nothing about finance.
But he knew one thing.
He knew how to code. He was working as a programmer for an engineering firm, writing software to calculate things like the optimal width of highways.
Which seems like a long way from the New York Stock Exchange.
Geographically, yes, but logically, it's the exact same thing. It's all about optimization. So in 1987, Peterffy saves up enough money to buy a seat on the NASDAQ.
And you have to picture the NASDAQ queue in the 80s. It wasn't a quiet server farm.
Oh, no. It was a room full of sweaty guys in colorful jackets screaming at each other.
The testosterone pit. Buy, sell,
Hmm.
2 and a quarter, all that.
Exactly. It was physical. It was visceral. It was all about intimidation and gut instinct.
Mm.
And Peterffy walks into this pit, and he doesn't see excitement. He sees inefficiency
He sees guys doing math in their heads.
and estimating prices and making mistakes. And he thinks to himself, I can automate this.
So what does he do?
He hacks the system,
Yes.
literally. He brings in a portable IBM computer. Now, this is 1987, so portable means it's the size of a large suitcase.
Right.
He puts it down next to his terminal, and he realizes he needs the data from the NASDAQ queue feed to go into his computer so he can run his fair value equations.
But the machines weren't connected back then. There was no API, no internet connection.
No. So he splices the wires, he physically taps into the data feed cable coming out of the NASDAQ terminal and routes it directly into his IBM.
I feel like that has to be illegal, or at least highly frowned upon.
It was definitely a gray area,
Yeah.
but it worked. His computer would read the prices, run these complex probability models, calculate the exact fair value of an option, and tell Peterffy exactly what to bid.
So while the other guys were just guessing and yelling
He was doing calculus. He was printing money.
until the authorities noticed.
Right. A NASDAQ queue inspector, let's just call him Jones, wanders over to Peterffy's station. He sees this nest of wires. He sees what's happening, and he pulls the plug.
Game over.
He tells Peterffy, you can't do this. The rules are clear. All trades must be entered manually through the keyboard. No direct feeds.
So this is the moment where most people would just give up, or they'd hire a bunch of interns to type really, really fast.
Peterffy is not most people. This is my favorite part of the entire book. He engages in what I can only describe as the most brilliant, malicious compliance I've ever heard of. The inspector said he had to use the keyboard. Fine. Peterffy hires a team of engineers, and they build a robot.
A literal robot. You're not speaking metaphorically.
No, a literal, physical cyborg contraption. First, since he couldn't splice the wires anymore, he built a camera system to watch the screen. It would read the glowing green pixels on the terminal to get the data input.
Okay, so that's the input. What about the output? How did it enter the trades?
He built a system of metal rods, pistons, and levers
Yeah.
that hung over the standard NASDAQ keyboard. It looked like something out of a steampunk nightmare. When his computer made a decision to buy or sell,
It fired the pistons.
it fired the pistons. Clack, 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 clack.
Oh my God.
It was deafening. It sounded like a machine gun going off in the middle of the trading pit. It could type orders faster than any human being could possibly dream of.
I just love the image of the other traders in their bright jackets just staring at this thing in absolute horror.
Oh, they hated it. It was loud, it was obnoxious, it was fast, and it was beating them at their own game. So the Inspector Jones comes back a week or so later. He hears this unbelievable racket, walks over, and just sees this mechanical monstrosity pounding the keys.
And what did he say? What could he say?
Peter Mellish was technically following the rules. He was entering trades through the keyboard.
Wow.
The inspector just shook his head, walked away.
And that was the tipping point. That was the crack in the dam.
That was the moment Wall Street changed forever. Peterffy proved that a black box, an algorithm, could beat a human trader. And it started an arms race. The big banks, the Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanleys of the world, they realized they couldn't compete with guys like Peterffy using gut instinct anymore. They needed their own bots.
And this fundamentally changed who they hired, right? The very culture of Wall Street.
Completely. I mean, in the 80s, if you wanted to work on Wall Street, you went to business school, you learned networking, sales, maybe some basic economics.
You learned how to have a firm handshake.
Exactly. By the mid-90s and into the 2000s, Wall Street stopped looking at MBAs. They started rating the physics departments of MIT and Caltech. They wanted quants.
Mathematicians, physicists, people who understood fluid dynamics, not corporate strategy.
Because the market is fluid dynamics when you think about it. It's just data flowing through pipes. And the only metric that mattered anymore was speed. How fast can you get the information? How fast can you act on it?
There's a crazy example in the book about this obsession with speed, a company called Spread Networks.
Oh, the tunnel. This is just unbelievable. So there's a delay when you send a signal from Chicago, where the futures are traded, to New York, where the stocks are traded.
The speed of light.
Right. It takes light a certain amount of time to travel through the existing fiber optic cables. The speed of light is the speed of light. You can't negotiate with physics.
No, but you can negotiate with geography.
You've got it. The existing cables followed the old train tracks, so they zigzagged around mountains and rivers Spread networks had a wild idea. They realized if they could just draw a perfectly straight line through the Earth, they could shave off 3 milliseconds.
3 milliseconds? That's less than the blink of an eye.
It's about 1/100th of a blink of an eye. But in the world of high-frequency trading, 3 milliseconds is an eternity. It is the difference between being first and being last, between making $1 billion and making nothing.
So what did they do?
They spent roughly $300 million digging a trench through the Allegheny Mountains. They blasted through solid rock, went under rivers, just to lay a fiber-optic cable that was a few miles shorter and a little bit straighter than the old one.
$300 million for 3 milliseconds.
That is the value of the algorithm.
Yeah.
That's how much they believe that speed equals power, that speed equals money.
Okay, so I get Wall Street. I do. Money is numbers. It's logical. It makes a certain kind of sense that math would eventually take over finance. But this is where Steiner takes the book in a direction that I found genuinely unsettling. He argues that this same logic, this relentless optimization, is moving into fields that we think of as uniquely human, specifically creativity.
This is where people get really defensive. We like to believe that art has a soul, that a computer can generate a stock tip, sure, but it can't write a symphony. It can't understand heartbreak or joy.
Right. A robot doesn't have feelings, so how can it possibly express them?
Well, let me introduce you to a little something called hit song science.
This is the story of Ben Novak and his old Nissan Bluebird.
Right. Ben Novak was a musician in New Zealand, and he drove this beat-up old car that could only pick up the BBC on the radio. So he spent years and years just listening to pop music, and he became obsessed with a question. Why are some songs huge hits and other, maybe better songs, are complete flops? Is it random? Or is there a pattern?
And he eventually found a company called Polyphonic HMI.
Run by a guy named Mike McCready. And their entire thesis was simple. A hit song is a math problem. They took every single Billboard Top 40 song from the last some years and analyzed their acoustic properties.
The beat, the harmony, the chord progression.
The spectral acoustics, the pitch, the tempo. They turned the music into thousands of data points.
They quantified it.
Exactly. And they plotted all these songs on a massive multidimensional graph. And what they found was fascinating. Hit songs aren't random at all. They cluster together. There are these mathematical sweet spots in the data.
Hit clusters.
If your new song lands in one of these hit clusters, it has a very, very high probability of commercial success. If it lands outside of them, well, good luck playing coffee shops for the rest of your life.
And I imagine the music industry was pretty skeptical of this.
Of course they were. Record execs pride themselves on their golden ears. They think they have this mystical, innate ability to just hear a hit. But then came Norah Jones.
Come Away With Me.
A huge album, a monster hit. But before it was released, the execs at her label were terrified. They thought it was too slow, too jazzy, too adult. It didn't sound like Britney Spears or NSYNC, who were dominating the charts at the time.
They thought it was going to be a massive flop.
They did, but they ran it through the algorithm anyway. The algorithm went nuts. It scored the album off the charts. It predicted it would be a massive global smash hit. And the reason was, mathematically, it hit the same emotional resonance points as classic hits from decades past. It didn't sound like Britney, but it vibrated, acoustically, the same way as, say, a classic soul record.
And it sold 26 million copies.
26 million. The algorithm was right. The golden years were wrong.
But see, I can play devil's advocate there for a second. That's analysis. That's just predicting what people will like based on what they've liked before. Like Netflix recommending a movie to me. It's not creating the movie.
That is a fair and important distinction. So let's take it a step further. Let's talk about David Cope and his creation, Emmy.
David Cope. This story is wild. He was a composer, a music professor at UC Santa Cruz.
And he had a terrible, crippling case of writer's block. He was desperate. He had a commission to finish an opera, and he just couldn't do it. The well was dry. So being a curious, tech-minded guy, he started writing a computer program to help him generate some ideas.
He fed it a bunch of classical music?
Thousands and thousands of measures of Bach, Mozart, Beethoven. He wanted the program to analyze their style.
To find their signature.
Right, to find the little mathematical tricks and patterns and motifs that make Bach sound like Bach and not like Mozart. He called the program Emmy, short for Experiments in Musical Intelligence.
And Emmy got a little too smart for her own good.
She didn't just analyze, she started composing. Cope would hit a button, and Emmy would spit out a brand new chorale in the style of Bach. Not a copy, not a remix. a new original piece that followed the mathematical rules of Bach's style so perfectly that it was indistinguishable from the real thing.
And this leads to what they call the Turing test for music.
It's incredible. Cope took these computer-generated pieces and played them for live audiences at concerts. He didn't tell them who wrote them, and people were weeping in their seats. They were giving standing ovations. They wrote reviews describing the music as touching the very depths of the human soul.
They were projecting the soul into the math.
Exactly. And then at the end of the concert, Cope would get on stage and tell them, he'd say, "By the way, a computer wrote that piece you just heard."
And the mood in the room changed.
Instantly, they were furious. They booed him off the stage. They felt cheated. They felt tricked. And it reveals something really profound about us, about human nature. We don't just value the art for the art's sake.
We value the struggle.
We value the struggle. We want to know that a human being suffered to write that beautiful symphony. If we find out a machine did it in 2 seconds while processing a spreadsheet, it loses its value to us.
It feels like a magic trick where you suddenly see all the wires.
Precisely. But the machine doesn't care if we're angry or not.
Yeah.
Cope eventually built a successor to Emmy, a bot called Annie. And Annie doesn't just mimic old masters. She uses machine learning to evolve her own unique style. She writes haiku now, too.
Haiku.
Yes, there's one quoted in the book. "The fire crackles loud in the morning air as I wander on the path."
I mean, that's actually pretty evocative. It's not bad.
It's good, and it's just code. It's just an algorithm selecting words based on probability and syntax rules. It has no idea what a fire is or what a path is.
So, okay, bots can trade stocks faster than us. They can write music that makes us cry. What about strategy? I've always heard that games like chess are relatively easy for computers because it's a game of perfect information.
Right, you can see the whole board. All the pieces are visible.
But something like poker, that's always been different.
That was the firewall. For a long, long time, computer scientists said, okay, Deep Blue beat Kasparov at chess. Fine. But a computer will never, ever beat a top human professional at poker.
Because poker is about lying. It's about bluffing.
It's a game of imperfect information. You don't know what cards I have. I don't know what cards you have. I might be betting huge on a terrible hand just to scare you out of the pot. That requires psychology, right? It requires human intuition. Or so we thought.
Enter Thomas Peterffy,
A computer science professor at Carnegie Mellon. He decided to take on the challenge. He built a bot to play Texas Hold'em, but he didn't try to teach it psychology or how to read people. He taught it pure game theory.
And how does that differ?
A human plays to win the pot. We get emotional, we get greedy, we want to win this specific hand. The bot, on the other hand, plays to be unexploitable.
Unexploitable.
It looks at the game over the course of millions and millions of hands, and it realized something crucial. It realized that if it only ever bet when it had good cards, the humans would figure that out very quickly and just fold every time it bet.
It would be too predictable.
Far too predictable. So, the pure math told the bot, to win in the long run, I must lie in the short run. The algorithm taught itself to bluff.
That is terrifying. The machine learned that deceit is the optimal strategy.
It did, not because it's tricky or clever, but because mathematically, randomizing your behavior is the only way to prevent your opponent from guessing your strategy and exploiting you. And these bots are now crushing top human professionals.
I believe it. They don't sweat. They don't have tells.
They don't get tired. They don't get angry or go on tilt when they lose a big hand. They just execute the math perfectly forever.
And if you can use this kind of logic to map out a poker game,
You can use it to map out a war.
this is the section on Bruce Bueno de Mesquita.
A political scientist who is something of a legend in the intelligence community. He built an algorithm for the CIA to predict political outcomes. And the thing that always shocks people is that his model ignores almost everything we think matters in geopolitics.
It ignores history, culture, religion, all of that.
Doesn't care. It doesn't care why the Sunnis and the Shiites have been fighting for 1,000 years. It doesn't care about the unique cultural nuances of the North Korean regime. It treats every single situation as a cold, rational game of leverage.
So what does it look at then?
Just 4 variables. 1, who are the players, the leaders, the generals, the voting blocs? 2, what do they publicly say they want? 3, how much power or influence do they actually have to get it? And 4, how important is this specific issue to them? How focused are they?
That's it.
That's it. It assumes every single person is a rational actor trying to maximize their own self-interest, just like the poker bot.
And the big question is, does it work?
The CIA did an internal audit of his predictions. They found that Bueno de Mesquita's algorithm was accurate twice as often as their own human analysts.
Twice as often. That's got to be embarrassing for the analysts.
I would think so. Humans get bogged down in the narrative. We get emotional. We think, oh, this particular leader is crazy. He's going to do something irrational. The bot just says, no, he is acting rationally to preserve his own power within his specific context.
There was a fantastic example in the book about Iran and the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
This was back in 2009.
Right. The whole world was panicking. Iran is going to build a nuke. We need to invade. The algorithm looked at the data, the Ayatollah, the Revolutionary Guard, the scientists, all the players, and it came back with a prediction. No, they won't build the bomb.
Why not?
Leverage. The bot calculated that the threat of building a bomb is incredibly valuable politically. It gets you a seat at the international table, it gets you respect and fear, but actually building the bomb, that invites crippling sanctions, airstrikes, total isolation. It's a losing move in the long run.
So the bot predicted they would develop the capability.
They would enrich the uranium, get everything ready, but stop just short of actually assembling the weapon.
Which, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, is pretty much exactly what happened for a decade.
It was a nuanced, sophisticated, and correct prediction made by a piece of software that couldn't find Iran on a map.
It's seeing the invisible skeleton of the situation without all the noise.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so we've covered finance, art, and geopolitics. But let's bring it even closer to home. Let's talk about my body, my health, because surely medicine is the ultimate human profession. I want a doctor who looks me in the eye, not a kiosk in a pharmacy.
This is where the book gets really controversial, but the data is pretty undeniable. The human touch in medicine is, in many cases, actually killing people.
Wow. Okay, you have to explain that.
Think about the physician's desk reference, the PDR. It's that giant, thick book you see in every single doctor's office. It lists every approved drug, every interaction, every side effect. It is over 3,000 pages long.
And new drugs and new research come out every single week.
Every week. It is physically impossible for a single human brain to memorize that book and keep it updated in real time. So what do doctors do? They rely on heuristics, mental shortcuts.
The last patient I saw with these symptoms did well on amoxicillin, so I'll give you that.
Exactly. Or the drug rep from Pfizer bought me a really nice lunch last week, so I remember this brand name. We call it the average doctor problem.
Right.
If you get the best doctor in the world on their best day, you're fine. But if you get an average doctor on a Tuesday afternoon when he's tired and stressed, you might get a misdiagnosis, you might get the wrong drug.
Enter Brent James.
Brent James is a hero in this story. He's a doctor at Intermountain Healthcare in Utah, and he realized that medicine was being practiced too much like an art and not enough like an engineering discipline. He wanted to standardize it.
He created protocols.
Checklists.
Algorithms.
If a patient comes in presenting with the symptoms of heart failure, you do step 1, step 2, step 3.
Yeah.
Every time. No guessing. No gut feeling.
I bet the doctors just love that.
Oh, they hated it. They absolutely hated it. They called it cookbook medicine. They said, I'm not a robot. I'm a healer. You're taking away my professional judgment. They have this God complex where they think their intuition is magic.
But Brent James had the data to back it up.
He did. And when he forced the doctors to follow the algorithms, the results were staggering. The death rate for coronary bypass surgery at his hospital dropped to 1.5%. The national average at the time was 3%.
He cut the death rate in half.
In half. Deaths from pneumonia dropped by 40%. We're talking about thousands and thousands of lives saved simply by removing human ego and variability and just following a script that works.
And now we have things like IBM's Watson.
The same computer that won on Jeopardy is now being used to assist oncologists in treating cancer. Watson can read, 20 million pages of medical journals in a few seconds? It can match a patient's specific genetic mutation to an obscure clinical trial that was published yesterday in Tokyo. No human doctor can possibly do that.
It's not a fair fight.
It's not. And think about prescriptions. There's a robotic pharmacy at the University of California, San Francisco. It's this massive automated machine that picks pills and fills bottles. Do you know what its error rate is?
It has to be low.
It's 0. In hundreds of thousands of prescriptions filled, 0 errors. Humans make mistakes. We get tired. We grab the wrong bottle off the shelf. The bot doesn't.
So if the bots are smarter, faster, more creative, and more reliable than us, what's left? The book moves from medicine to psychology next. The idea that, okay, at least we can understand each other better than a machine can.
Yeah.
How about that?
I knew you were going to say that.
Let's talk about NASA. Back in the 1970s, NASA had a very serious problem. They were putting men into these tiny metal cans, Skylab, the Apollo missions, and shooting them into space for weeks or months at a time. If those guys didn't get along, the mission could fail.
You can't exactly step outside for some fresh air if your roommate is getting on your nerves. Precisely.